Welcome to Gracefully Greying. I'm your host, Attorney Henry Gornbein. Today on Gracefully Greying, we are going to be exploring an important topic with my guest, one of the leading negligence attorneys, not only in Michigan, but in the country, who is not only an excellent attorney, but he's well-liked. You talk to judges who don't like a lot of attorneys, and Ven Johnson is respected by judges, and I know a lot of judges, and I've heard that from many of them. So today we're going to discuss issues involving negligence, especially as it impacts upon those of us who are gracefully greying with Ven Johnson. Ven, welcome to Gracefully Greying.
Henry, all right, thanks for having me on.
It's a pleasure having you. First of all, why don't you tell our viewers a little bit about your background and who you are?
Well, I've been a lawyer for 33 years here in Michigan, and my office is at Johnson Law. We have offices in Detroit, downtown Flint, and downtown Grand Rapids. So we do nothing but plaintiff's personal injury law. So folks are pretty familiar with what that is nowadays with all the ads on TV.
And have you done that throughout your whole career?
Absolutely. I was a defense lawyer for 9 years first, and then switched sides, and then I've been a plaintiff lawyer for the last, don't make me do the math, Henry, but
how many attorneys are in your firm?
Right now we have 15 lawyers and about just shy of 40 full-time employees.
And you launched on your own, 8 years ago?
8 years ago, right? Almost to the day, so yep.
Why don't you tell our viewers about the three components of a personal injury claim?
Okay. Well, any time under Michigan law that someone is injured through the negligence of another, the judge would explain to the jury, Henry, that we have the burden of proof. So we're the ones that have to prove what happened more likely than not. It's called preponderance of the evidence, as you know. We have to prove that someone was negligent, that somebody was injured, and that the negligence caused the injury. We call that proximate cause.
Right.
So those are the three basic elements in everything from a car crash case to somebody being in the roadway, God forbid, in a crosswalk or crossing the road and a car striking them, product liability. If there was some type of product that was defective, you would still have to show those three basic elements. So it's very common throughout all the cases that we work with.
And this goes back to the common law. I mean,
yeah, a lot of people don't know that, but right. Common law is what we brought over here on the Mayflower with us, and that's one area of law that is developed, if you will, from case to case by way of the written opinions of the courts. And then we have, of course, statutes, which are laws that the legislature passes, and then that we have that in state and federal. So those are the three areas of the law that we often deal with.
Now, you practice not only in Michigan, but you fly all over the country. Is that true?
I do. I'm very blessed. Yes, sir. I've had cases in, I can't say in every single state, but I've been in the majority of them through a variety of circumstances, right.
Now, when you try a case in another state, if it's federal, do you still have to be admitted to the bar?
No, not usually, but I always read their rules just to see if they want me to be, just in case. When you practice and do cases out of state, you have to be very careful. They call that carpetbagging, as you know. And a lot of the judges and the lawyers in that area don't like people from the outside coming in. So I always associate with a lawyer from that area who's very familiar with the court and the circumstances of the laws in that area. And they're with me in court when I do my cases out of state.
As we're aging, are we more prone to injury? For example, if someone in their 20s or 30s is in an auto accident, someone in their 60s or 70s, same accident, different result?
Absolutely, Henry, and that's one of the very kind of unfortunate things when we're talking about gracefully graying. There's no question that a lower levels of force cause greater injuries in the elderly, although now I'm one of them, so I shouldn't say elderly, right? In those of us that are young, right. 57 years young. And but seriously, in addition to that, what happens is, as part of the hospital and treatment course, complications can arise that don't normally arise with younger, stronger, I'll call it more able-bodied folks, and that can lead to horrible consequences, including obviously death or horrible life-changing injury.
Ben, why don't you tell us about auto accidents involving pedestrians?
Okay. Unfortunately, Henry, and just a weird kind of a twist of fate, in the last 5 years, we have had just a incredible amount of cases with elderly folks who have been hit and struck as pedestrians in parking lots. And I mean Meijer, Target, Walmart, right down the street here at a hospital that you know. Crazy. But I think it's because of the distracted driving, and of course most of us just automatically jump to the phones, which are of course part and parcel. But when people are focused on what they're going to go in and get at the store, or what they got at the store, now I got to get home to the kids, or let out the dog, or whatever, they just become like no one else is around the area. So what I try to tell people is when you're in a parking lot situation, a driver of a car has to be more than just cautious. They have to keep lookout on everything for little kids, elderly, dogs, and I mean, you name it. They got to be looking at everything as opposed to pretending like nothing else exists there. But especially with some of the older folks, because it takes a little longer sometimes, and they're not necessarily are crosswalks everywhere in a parking lot. Imagine that. There's only one crosswalk. It gets from a part of the parking lot into the store. But you're all on your own, running in and out of the cars, if you will, walking into the cars until then. So you're on your own. And the people that have gotten hit, Henry, have horrible injuries, horrible complications like I just told you.
What about the liability situation?
Well, the liability situation is pretty much the same as it would be in the roadway, and that is meaning the street as opposed to a parking lot. But interestingly, there's a little twist of Michigan law. If you're in a parking lot of for example, a Walmart store, let's just pick on them for a second, that is not a public road. So the Michigan Vehicle Code technically doesn't apply to them. However, of course, because the speed limit should be so low, and they often have 5-mile-an-hour speed limit signs and so forth in there, and they can set the speed limit to the way they want as long as it's equal to or less than what the roadway would do. So yeah, they get to control that. But so there's some interesting different laws that apply.
Are they business invitees then or not?
Yes, that's what I argue. But also that it's a higher duty of care, as I would say, because we all know when we're in a parking lot, people are going to go in and out. People are going to be on their phones walking. Right. People are going to be pushing carts with kids. Kids will be running in and out. God forbid a dog jumps out or what, all sorts of craziness. So people have to be in the cars. They have to have a greater lookout. But as a defense attorney, which as you know I was one, I would argue the same thing on the other side. The pedestrians know that people drive, I could say to my little kids, people drive crazy in these parking lots, so give me your hand. Okay, but that's a concept that we should think about, and especially as we get older, you cannot assume because you're a pedestrian that you have the right of way. Even though we all say that, under Michigan law, Henry, it's not true unless you're in a roadway in a crosswalk.
So a parking lot is different than a roadway and a crosswalk. If you're in a crosswalk, you have the right of way. If you're outside of a crosswalk, you're fair game. Well, and in a parking lot.
Now you sound like one of my defense opponents. But no, that's what they certainly argue. No, I don't think that's how it really is. No, that's the way it should be. No. And I would certainly argue that we all should yield to pedestrians no matter what, even if they're doing crazy stuff. But pedestrians have got to realize, but especially in these parking lots, that they, for their own safety, they got to we called a head on a swivel back in our day in certain sports. So they could be looking all around them. Very common accident on a roadway, by the way. Crossing in a crosswalk, we never think about the cars coming from behind us and then turning left and want to go basically either in front of us or behind us. Very, very common. I've had 2 cases in downtown Royal Oak in the middle of the day where that happened, and people literally, Henry, just got run down.
How serious were the injuries?
Horrible injuries. Car versus people, we all know who's going to win.
Yeah, absolutely. What about the fact that, you know, car versus people, car wins, but now cars are supposedly safe, but we now have rear cameras. Do people not pay attention to them?
Well, again, and that's an excellent cross-examine for a lawyer like me. We have cameras. I would want to know what kind of car you drove, and I'd want to double check what cameras are available. The car that I'm currently driving right now, yeah, I put that thing in reverse, right? And I got a camera that shows right behind my bumper, so there should be no blind spot like back in the day would be an excuse for this situation years ago. That should not exist, and because of a lot of I'll call it the sonar, if you will, the beeping noise. If someone is coming near your bumper, many of the cars also sound a safety, if you will, alarm, telling you that something's approaching.
Do you see many cases where cell phones have become an issue because of distracted violent driving?
Way too many. Right. And then people, of course, deny it, and then you find out that there's no question that the driver was going down the street and the person was crossing the street and had to be visible to that driver for at least 5, 6, 7 seconds, and never saw him until he was on my hood type thing. Yeah. So you know they're doing something bad, really.
Now, aging clients, gracefully graying, the injuries are worse.
Right.
But are the damages limited? Because, you know, you're I always
not
think
in Johnson law, Henry. But no, that's the argument, as you already know.
But the thing is, you know, the ideal client is someone in his or her 20s and 30s with a lot of earning years ahead, and then you've got, you know, tremendous lost wages. But if someone's already retired, that puts more limits on, I guess.
There's no question that some of the defense attorneys will take the position that because somebody is no longer working, or if they are working, there's only a year or two left in their work life, then yeah, their economic injuries, we would call that, are somewhat limited. I obviously don't see it that way, but it's a reality. But then again, with regard to the injuries, because the injuries typically are so severe, it leads to worse injuries in the future. And of course, as we get older, it nothing ever gets better, right? It always gets worse. So whatever you have as a result of these injuries will have a huge impact on the golden years that you know about from law school. And in other words, meaning that as time goes on, it's going to make it more difficult for that person to do anything like they were able to do before. So it really impacts the elderly, no question about it.
Our bones become more brittle as well, so everything.
Our immune systems are not as good. The recovery times are longer. And like, you know, think about a classic, God forbid, a hip fracture break, when the elderly fall or trip, way too common. I know we'll probably talk about that too, or slip, whatever you want to call it. And we have the television commercial, you know, I've fallen and can't get up. I've seen that very scenario, and it's horrible. I had a lady that died after she was on the bottom of her stairwell after falling, and no one came for her despite a particular device that she had that you've seen advertised on television. And she died basically of shock from internal injuries and bleeding because no one knew she was there. Horrible injuries with grave consequences for the future if folks are fortunate enough to survive.
And in that situation, who's the cause of action? Is it against the homeowner's insurance, or?
It all depends on what scenario we're talking about. But if someone
give us some examples.
Right. Well, for example, if somebody is at your home and there is a defective or loose step or stair that pitches them down or forward, they would end up suing the homeowner. They don't sue the insurance company, they sue the actual person who owns the home. And the argument would be you either knew or should have known that you had a defective or highly dangerous step that would move. Well, if you put your foot down on a step and it moves, you know, more times than not, you're going to fall. So that would be one small example.
What if it's your home?
Whether home or at a place of business, I've had situations where there was carpet, and for whatever reason the carpet became snagged, and people kept tripping and telling the folks that you got to change the carpet, and they never did until the last person, and that person sustained a brain injury and a broken hip and a broken leg.
Now, another area that you deal with are called trip and falls, slip and falls.
Right.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about that area?
Well, we call that premises liability. In other words, it was on somebody else's premises. Somebody else's, whether it's home, business, what have you. And that can be anything from a situation like we were just talking about, where someone tripped on a carpet, or they slipped on a water that was left on the floor that nobody cleaned up, at a grocery store or what have you. But again, what happens, especially with the elderly, Henry, the injuries usually are so severe, these become very big cases. And so they're very, very common. And what we have in Michigan is a horrible law called open and obvious that I know you've heard me complain about, and others like me, I know.
Explain the open and obvious.
Okay. Well, the idea of common law that you and I were talking about that has been handed down for years is if you have a home or you have a premises, whether again business or whatever, Johnson law, I need to make my law firm reasonably safe for people so that when they come there, they're not unreasonably and unnecessarily injured. I don't have to guarantee, and I can't guarantee that nothing could ever happen to them if something happened and they did something or what have you. But perfect example that I like to use is, let's say that in the middle of Johnson Law hallway, I cut a great big 5-foot hole and I leave it unguarded and it falls all the way down 26th floor to the bottom of the Buell building. Okay, you'd say, Ven, you're insane. You're going to kill somebody, and if you don't guard that or fix that, someone gets hurt or die, you owe them. No. That's true, and that's how the law should be. Until about 25 years ago, when our system completely flip-flopped, and there was a law passed that now says that if that hole is open and obvious, Henry, and you should have seen it on your own, screw you, your fault. Trial judge throws the case out of court on his or her own. You never even get to go to a jury. So if it's so open and so obvious that someone could be hurt, instead of making me fix it, onus goes on you, the victim, which is just absolutely unfair. I think it's unconstitutional and it needs to be changed. And I can tell you there's a lot of us in this area of law that are hoping that that goes up to the Michigan Supreme Court soon and gets changed.
Are we one of the worst states with regard to that?
Yes, the case called Lugo that I know you've heard about is a situation similar where a lady who was legally blind but still was able to go and walk and do things on her own. She actually could drive under certain circumstances, believe it or not, but she was legally blind.
Okay.
Parked in her church's parking lot and fell in a hole similar to kind of the one I just said to you, not so drastic, not 26 feet down, but fell because she couldn't appreciate that there was a hole there due to her eyesight. The Michigan Supreme Court threw that case out of court, applied this standard of open and obvious, and in my opinion, and in, not just my opinion, in law review articles all across the United States, I've read other state Supreme Court literally laugh at this outcome in Lugo and
talk. It's ludicrous.
It is ludicrous, and it is directly opposite to civil jurisprudence. What we do in the civil law is try to create a system of fairness where you want to promote safety, right? So no one wants to be injured. We don't want anybody to get injured. You can't guarantee it, but you just got to be reasonable and operate things safely. And if you do that, you're going to be fine. But if you don't do that, you should be held accountable for what you did or didn't do.
Another scenario, what about a grocery store where someone breaks a bottle, spills some liquid? Is that open and obvious, or?
Well, that's something you would absolutely fight about. If they broke the bottle, one of my claims would be, obviously, they're supposed to inspect, because I'm a business invitee, so under Michigan law, they have to actually inspect. They just can't sit back and do nothing. They have to go up and down the aisles, and grocery stores, by the way, do. Usually, the ones that I'm familiar with say once every 15 minutes. I don't know if that's actually what happens, but that's somebody's job to do. We've all heard about, spill in aisle 11.
Right.
Again, we make it as a joke, but it really is not a joke. And so if they do their inspections appropriately, hopefully someone reports that they broke a bottle, right? And then they go and get it cleaned up immediately. Yellow cone, mop, make sure it's dry. But if they don't, could that lead to somebody being seriously injured? Yeah, and it does, and that would lead to, in our opinion, liability under premises liability law.
It's a big area. It's a tough area. And, well, from a plaintiff's perspective, aren't we one of the worst states?
Oh, in terms of premises liability, yes, because we have taken the right to a jury trial away from the people and away from jurors and given it to judges. And I don't mean any, I love judges. I'm involved in so many different bar organizations, and I appreciate the hard work our judges do. But the law is, in my opinion, crooked. We don't want, under what area of law do you know says judge gets to make all the rulings and take it away from the jury at the time of trial? We send people to jail every day because of juries and what they do.
Right.
But because some people, some cynical people, I might add, a lot of people, Henry, laugh about slip and trip and falls. They think it's funny. I mean, you go on YouTube and watch all these people fall, and the people who are taping, you hear laughter. First reaction that I have is, "Oh my God, are they okay?" And so it's there's a lot of cynical people out there, and it's part of that. everybody kind of imagined that all these things are fake. Well, they're not fake. If they are fake, then they should be thrown out of court, and the lawyer who filed it should be taken to task. And you and I both know they would be under Michigan law. But we are one of the worst states, and again, the public policy behind premises liability law should be for the person in the best position to fix the issue, and that's the landowner. The onus should be on them, not on the victim.
Ven, driving, and a lot of your practice is auto-negligence.
Yes, sir.
As we age, there are statistics that a lot of older drivers are safe drivers, but our reaction time is not as good. Our vision is often not as good. A lot of people don't want to drive at night.
Right.
Often we're slower. So
Right.
what are some of the issues that you face with regard to that?
Well, this is a personal issue to me because my dad, God rest his soul, was one of those that didn't want to give up his independence and wasn't going to quit driving until the state told him so. Well, our position as the family was, Dad, you got to stop. And unfortunately, it resulted in a crash on him and Mom on US 23 or rear end, which therefore was Dad's fault, at age 77, and then he started listening a little bit more. It's a big issue, and number one thing that I say is, we as a society, we have to take a look at that, and I think the Secretary of State really needs to take really good looks at that. No one wants to take liberties away from anybody, but we take people's driver's licenses away for a lot less than that, and I think we really need to think about that. So I think people should have to be tested more frequently than once every 5 years or 8 years or whatever it is on your license renewal after a certain age, number one. Number two, I think that we as family members, and I should have been probably taking my dad more to task than I did. Thank God no one was really injured.
But it's a hard conversation to have,
Yeah.
and especially here in Michigan, we don't have any valid mass transit.
I know. It really is. So and what you're doing is you're taking somebody's freedom and their independence away.
Right.
And so I get the back and forth, but what you have to do, driving is so much more dangerous than we give it credit for, Henry, in terms of, if you look at the statistics of Michigan and Michigan roadways, a lot of the debate recently on the whole no fault issue, look at our numbers of traffic crashes, and we're one of the highest in the country, sadly. And so, but it happens everywhere, and people get so catastrophically injured in traffic crashes. So when it comes to our elderly, we got to look at that and try to be a little bit more, I think, preventative. And again, I'm not advocating taking it away automatically from people, but I think that we as a family and we as a state, we need to make it a little bit more difficult for people. I think as they get older, they should have to prove that everything's fine before we just let them out in the roadway. Because I will tell you, I had 2 kids in the middle of the road, 5-lane highway, where the kids crossed over into the left turn lane, waiting for oncoming traffic, get run down by an elderly lady who right in the middle of 1:30 in the afternoon. They were right in front of her car. She hit them right over her 2 headlights. She never saw them.
You're right, and we don't do much. The state really is very derelict in that area.
I think it's something that we really should think about, and I certainly will be talking to our Secretary of State about some of my ideas in terms of what maybe we could do without trying to make it too onerous, obviously, on folks. But again, I think it should be incumbent on us to prove that we're still capable driving.
So what would you include? That someone should have an actual driving test? Because now all you have to do is take a written exam and be photographed.
Yeah, the answer is yes. I think that is something that should have to be repeated every few years. Is it 5 years? I don't know. If there's a lot of people, experts more than me. But think about the folks that we see frequently, Henry, in some of these accidents. Remember there was a tragic crash over at one of the Jack's car washes where an elderly man apparently didn't realize that he had his car in drive and not neutral and popped over the rail and killed a worker at Jack's. Think about the people who crash through stores and restaurants frequently, are the elderly, where they thought they had it in either park or they thought they were in reverse and they went forward through. So there's some really tragic examples that we have where we need to do something as a society. But again, as families, I think we also need to step up on our moms and dads, brothers and sisters.
Very difficult.
Yes, it is.
What about medications in driving? Is that a factor?
Absolutely it does. Medications can affect you, and that's why it's really important for the Secretary of State, again, to be actively monitoring that. I know if a person has a seizure, the Secretary of State is supposed to be notified. Well, do you know that the physicians of that person do not have a duty to notify? They leave it to the driver. Well, see, if I have a seizure and I want to drive, my doc says I'm not supposed to drive. Do I really have to go to the Secretary of State? My doc can't make me. Come on, what is that? So yeah, seizures are another horrible example, which can happen not just with the elderly, by the way, but where we need as a society and our Secretary of State, we need to step up and make it where the treating physicians must report somebody that they think is a danger to themselves or the public health.
It makes sense.
Absolutely makes sense.
And it makes sense. Perhaps you should have a list of your medications, I don't know, on your driver's license, but something, especially if you have certain medications where you shouldn't be on the road.
Anything that affects your consciousness, your perception, your reaction time that you were talking about, absolutely.
Interesting. Well, there are a lot of areas of the law that need to be addressed.
I agree with you.
Ven, we're going to go into nursing home negligence. And why don't you set the stage for that before we break as we finish the first show?
Okay. Well, nursing home negligence is just such a tragic area of law. But there are a number of cases that I've handled and others in our area that you know extremely well, Henry, that specialize in these areas. And what it boils down to is if someone becomes injured while they're in a nursing home or some type of a home shelter type program or facility, again, the injuries can be highly catastrophic and often include death. So it is an incredibly important area of law, and as a greater percentage of our population gets older, we as a society need to look at this and make sure that as much of these unnecessary and highly avoidable injuries are addressed, because no one deserves to be treated poorly, especially as we get older.
Then we got 1 minute left. Give our viewers 2 or 3 takeaways from this first segment.
Well, I think it's really important for your viewers to realize that as we go to older, you become more vulnerable to personal injury and death, even through absolute no fault of your own. So it's really important that as things take a little longer, that we remain as aware as possible and realize that we just don't move as quickly as we used to, and might need to be even more careful than ever before in terms of what we're doing.
We don't see as well. We often don't hear as well. Our reaction times are slower. So these are all issues. And we're going to be taking a short break and concluding this show, Ven, and then we're going to come back and talk really about nursing homes and a little bit about medical malpractice, which are other areas that you deal with as well.
Thank you, Henry. Appreciate it.
So, Ven Johnson, I want to thank you so much for being my guest on Gracefully Greying. And I want to thank you for watching Gracefully Greying.